All right, y'all. Should we get ready? Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Lunchbox lecture, Remembering Those Who Served, Repatriating American POW MIA Soldiers from World War II with our dear friend, board-certified genealogist Clarise Soper. Before Clarice's talk, we'd like to begin today's program with a pause for a short message from our sponsor. Sponsors these Lunchbox lectures, AARP Louisiana. Probably if I hit it the right way.
Hello, I'm Joanne Jenkins, Chief Executive Officer of AARP, America's largest membership organization serving people aged 50 and over. With more than 5 million of our 38 million members currently or previously having served in the military, we're in a mission to support veterans and military families. That's why we've created a wide range of free resources, tools, and community programs to help veterans and military families navigate their options and meet challenges head-on. We've developed a job board that directly connects veterans and military spouses to employers wanting to hire them. And we have free resources that provide some military structure to starting a business. We know that when you're a military veteran caregiver, you start younger, care longer, and face many unique challenges. That's why AARP provides a free military caregiving guide containing important and timely information that you truly need. Because military veterans or service members are twice as likely to be a target for fraud, the AARP Fraud Watch Network, in partnership with Operation Protect Veterans, provides free action alerts detailing the latest scams directed at veterans and military families. And through our state offices nationwide, AARP can help you find the right opportunity to give back to your community and fellow veterans. To learn more about these and other resources, visit aarp.org/veterans. Thank you.
And thanks to our sponsors again for all the support they provide for us for these Lunchbox lectures. There's a phrase, ladies and gentlemen, you often hear kind of down south about saying that when you run into someone that it's good for the soul. And that is so true about today's Lunchbox lecture, having a chance to get reacquainted, see my dear friend and former colleague here at the museum, Clarise Soper, and her husband, Jim. So let me provide a short intro for Clarise, and then she will talk with you about remembering those who served, repatriating American POW MIA soldiers from World War II. Clarise is a board-certified genealogist who has been conducting genealogical research for over 30 years and is certified by the Board for Certification of Genealogists, specializing in the states of Mississippi and Alabama, as well as forensic and genetic genealogy. She is a published author, frequently gives presentations at genealogical and historical societies on various topics, and over the last 5 years, she has researched over 330 cases for the U.S. Army Past Conflict Repatriations branch. I'd like to add to that Clarise and I both worked here together at the museum for a year and a half, from September 2017 to February 2019, doing work for the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. We literally worked side by side, which we did in several different locales around the museum. And she had an enormous influence on us in the museum's Jenny Craig Institute for the Study of War and Democracy. We have something called World War II Research Services. I think many of you are aware of that. The person who manages that service, Rebecca Poole, is here with us today, my colleague in the Institute, and we're going to actually be reopening next month. So we'd like everyone to check out our website, follow what's happening there with announcements. It will be coming back next month. But Clarise had a huge impact on the service that we provide for veterans, including just how to look at documents. and ideas about how to package things for family members. What would they be interested in having? So our big premiere package is a narrative of a World War II member's service. It was really Clarice's idea that we do this. So we owe her so much, and just delighted that she's here. So join me in welcoming Clarise Soper. Clarice, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. Can y'all hear me? Okay. I am really excited to be back at what I feel is the most amazing military museum in the United States. It's a special place for me. I'm a veteran. I am married to a U.S. Army retired first sergeant, and my husband has a great uncle who was on the unaccounted-for list from World War II. So you can only imagine the kinds of feelings I have when I come into this building and hear their stories of even the ones that were able to come home. To me, it's just an absolute triumph. But before I would like to start talking about the recovery process, I'd like to give a little background information regarding the different types of professions that all come together to repatriate our soldiers. As Jason said, the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency oversees the effort to locate and account for and repatriate American service members from all branches of service and all conflicts since World War II. The core of DPA's day-to-day operations involves researching case files, investigating leads, excavating sites, and identifying soldiers who were killed in action but never brought home. In order to accomplish its mission, the DPAA employs anthropologists, archaeologists, including underwater archaeologists, archivists, historians, scientists in a number of different fields, credentialed genealogists, and many other professions. They also run the largest forensic anthropology laboratory in the whole world. It's just incredible, the amount of people that work on every single soldier's case. Its mission includes maintaining and updating files for the unaccounted-for soldiers, assigning cases to genealogists, and all of our casework is strictly confidential, providing a case manager for the service members' families, and facilitating the DNA kits for the families back to the lab. They are also called family reference samples. If anybody ever talks to you about that, that's exactly what they call it. As the map in this shows that this is, even though they've got World War I on here, they don't actively pursue World War I, and that's why I wanted to highlight this particular slide is, again, to talk about how it assesses and integrates and everything for the next of kin. A tremendous amount of work that goes into this. As Jason mentioned, him and I sat side by side. Jason worked on this history part of where the soldier was, the unit he was with, where he may have fallen, and while I was working on the family, but not necessarily the same soldier at the same time. The work varied. As this map shows, at present there are over 81,000 service members who are missing from World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, and the Gulf Wars or any of the small other conflicts. 75% of those losses are located in the Indo-Pacific area, and over 41,000 are missing are presumed lost at sea. Now, that's either they were lost due to an explosion, over water, or ship. Whenever I think of that, I think of the hell ships that went down during the war. And of that number, over 72,000 from World War II alone, which is a staggering number. This cover page is from my husband's great uncle, individual deceased personnel file, and this is also abbreviated to an IDPF. That's what it's called. Since my casework is strictly confidential, I can share, with my husband's family permission, sample documents from his file in this presentation. For my casework, I only receive a partial IDF file. They go through and they pick out the pages for me that may be relevant to my task. Sometimes it's not enough, and I can and have asked for a complete file just to make sure I've gotten every little nugget out of that file that may help me find the family. Every soldier has a file. The number of documents within those files varies greatly. You could have sometimes I've only gotten 2 pieces of paper, and other times I've gotten over 30. So it all depends upon the soldier and the year and the unit he was with as to how much information is available. And of course, my tasks are to identify the primary and secondary next of kin, identify the DNA donors, and to prepare a report in lineage. Now, the primary next of kin is also known as the PNOC, and that's going to be the oldest living relative of the soldier, and not necessarily a blood relative like most people would think. If they are legally adopted or legally decreed, they can be the PNOC or the SNOC. They're just not eligible to provide DNA. And of course, the secondary next of kin, as y'all can imagine, is the second oldest living family member. The order of line of succession is what I prefer to say, is going to be the spouse. If the spouse is still living, she would be the primary next of kin, provided she has not remarried, or if she has, she's been widowed a second time. In all the cases I've worked, I have not come across a living spouse. Next are the children, again, adopted or legally decreed, grandchildren, siblings, half-blood and adopted, nieces and nephews, and then great nieces and nephews, and then finally on to cousins. If the soldier was married at the time of his death and the spouse is still living, again, she will be the PNOC. And we're finding in some of the other wars, like the Vietnam War, some of these spouses are, in fact, still living. So that becomes very important. Now, who do you determine, other than the closest living, if you have a niece and a nephew that are born the same year, is going to go by age. So if I have somebody that's born in March of 1944 and somebody that's born in September of 1944 that are nieces and nephews, then the oldest will be the PNOC and the youngest of the two would be the secondary next of kin. I worked a case that was kind of peculiar. The soldier had 2 nieces. One was from New York, one was from California. And they were born the same day. So when I was talking to them, I said, okay, what time were you born? And the one in New York knew when she was born. She had a birth certificate. The one in California didn't. So she sent for her birth certificate, and lo and behold, there was 10-minute difference between these two. Just 10 minutes separated the PNOC and the SNOC. And so the girl called me back and she said, well, I'm just going to share my duties with her should he ever be found. And I said, there you go. The caveat to this is state law can affect the order. So you have to be careful of what state you're working, and I work on soldiers from all over the United States. They don't say, because I live in Mississippi or I'm close to, or when I worked here in Louisiana, it's just not those cases. My soldiers can be from anywhere in the United States. So that is makes it for a little bit more difficult to ascertain the state law. So a lot of research just in that aspect sometimes has to be done. The DNA part, we're going to get to in a few minutes because I'd like to take some time so that people really understand the whole process. And the only one I'm going to test after this is Jason. So y'all are safe. Needless to say, I'm going to read the file. That's pretty much a no-brainer. Almost all my cases have the name, rank, service number, branch of service, and unit ID. Now, seeing as I work for the past conflict repatriation branch, I do Army, and Army and Army Air Force are the ones that I work with. Sometimes I get date of death. Sometimes I'll get a finding of death. And the finding of the death is determined by the government. If there was no eyewitness, if they can't determine when that soldier actually died, then they create a legal date of death so that the family can have some kind of closure and any kind of insurance policies or whatever and his can be obtained, and his personal belongings, if there's any found, can be returned to the family. And that's normally 1 year and 1 day after he was last seen. Race and religion, but only if the religion is declared. And I've had several cases where only the name, the rank, and the unit were identified. That was it. I had 2 little pieces of paper, and that's all I had to go on. Oftentimes, where the soldiers entered the service is not where they were born. So there's a huge migration that, everybody thinks migration is fairly recent. It's not. I could have had a soldier who was born in New York, and he decides to join the military in Montana. And then when I'm doing the research, I find his little brother joined the service in Washington. So the family keeps moving. A lot of the soldiers are foreign born, or their parents were, which adds a whole nother level to the research that needs to be done. Individual research plans are designed based on what I learn in that soldier's file. I start with that, and of course, any kind of research plan has to be fluid. You have to go with the information that you're finding, and you have to be able to analyze this information as you go. Not all birth certificates or birth dates that are in the file are accurate. A lot of them are off. Somebody might have wanted to join the military at 17, and that 1 year to them didn't make a whole lot of difference if it got them what they wanted. And sometimes they didn't really know. He might have said he was born December 12th, but, this birth certificate that when I get my hands on it might say August the 8th. It was just a number. Birth dates weren't nearly as important back then as they are now. So I want to research in the record groups that it's going to give me my information that I need. And that's going to be relationships that are records that identify relationships, census records, federal and state, marriage records, birth records, of course, death records of their children, obituaries, sometimes even city directories, especially when it comes to metropolitan areas. I know my family's from, back in the day, was from Detroit, and I've got city directories where my grandfather is listed in the city directory, and right beside his name is USA, alerting me that he's in the Army. But at the same time, I can look above his name and find out the names of his parents at that same address. So that gives me a viable clue to continue to research that particular line. And this is absolutely no different. Obituaries of the parents. A lot of times you will find articles about the missing soldiers, but sadly, not all have newspaper articles about them being missing in action. So in a lot of ways, that can hinder the research. A lot of people, especially I'm finding in the West Coast, just don't have obituaries, or the very small communities, especially in the Deep South, where there might only be 1,500 people in the whole town. Well, heck, why write an obituary when everybody in the town already knows? of that they've passed and when the funeral is going to be. So that too can hinder some of our research. And of course, not all records are online. You got to write to those county courthouses to get the marriage licenses, the marriage records. I contact local libraries for the itty bitty communities to see maybe, just maybe, there might be an obituary. I then also contact the cemetery, see who bought those plots, who's all buried there, because not everybody has a tombstone, but who's listed as their next of kin. And a lot of times that, I have to kind of finagle a little bit and send the cemetery, the memorandum for record that I was talking about, authorizing in order to get that information. But of course, my first priority is to identify their nuclear family, which is going to be the wife, their children, their grandchildren, also their mother, their father, and their brothers and their sisters. I'm working forward in time to identify the people I need to complete this task of primary and secondary, as well as the DNA donors. But I also, at the same time, need to work backwards so I can confirm those relationships, hopefully in more than one record, but also to identify any other DNA donors I may in fact need. If, depending upon the family structure, the soldier may have been an only child. He may have only had brothers, which means he would not have a sister that would, and her children, to be able to possibly donate DNA for the service member. So I'm going back and forth between the living and the people that have predeceased. I had a case once where the mother, the grandmother, and the great-grandmother were only daughters born to their parents. Only ones, all the rest of them were boys. So I ended up having to research all the way back to England in 1794, come down those lines, and I found three third cousins, twice removed, who had moved to the United States and were living in Washington State. That's the extent we will go to in order to get the lab everything they need to possibly identify our missing. So it can be quite extensive. This is, like I said, a sample document. I know it's going to be really hard to read and probably even harder online, but this is a typical document from the IDPF. This document is from Great Uncle John's file. It provides his name, his grade, his serial number / service number, organization, race, creed, which of course is religion, former service number, if any, date of death, we have that on this one, location last seen, and a physical description. Now the physical description really only helps me when I am looking at their draft cards. And especially if you can imagine, if I'm looking for a Jim Brown, there could be hundreds of them, all who were born in the same area, and that physical description can sometimes help me weed it down to smaller numbers. The difference with this particular case, and this happens a lot with my cases, is that I will have two service numbers. He happened to be an aviation cadet, so when he joined, he was enlisted. Once he completed pilot training, he was able to get his officer service number. So that's another. I might have records underneath both, underneath one and not the other, or underneath both. And the finding of death is, again, something that I will look for on here because it may have been on one piece of paper and not on another. You'll notice that when I flip over to the next screen, you will see that the information changes a little bit. I have lost the previous service number that was on the other document. Everything else, his statute, his name, you'll notice that it's gone from Johnston in the first file, first paper, to Johnson. That's also very common in these files. And not just his file, but in all services. However they spelled it on that particular moment in time is how it ends up in the file. And that's what I get. So needless to say, when we're doing research, I'm going to be researching, if I was researching this individual, I would be researching underneath both spellings of the surname. If I am researching a soldier that has an ethnic surname, like someone from Czechoslovakia, Greece, Poland, y'all will just not imagine how many different ways those names can be spelled. And so it becomes a little labor intensive. And of course, on here at the very bottom, I think you can see this says plane blew up in combat over the South Pacific area, and we'll talk about that a little later. But this is an important clue, and I get this a lot in my cases, to where it's got where he was stationed. Okay? Those are additional clues of where I might find other records, civilian records, like such as marriage records. This soldier may have been, this one wasn't, but I've had soldiers that have married before they went overseas. Their files have never been updated, and lo and behold, I'm finding children. You know, so these kind of things are very important to find any type of marriage records that may have existed. Here's another one where it actually shows primary and secondary next of kin at that moment in time. And if I can see correctly over here from this side, it's 1949. Of course, it was his mother and his sister. But all the other information really is the same. But I don't necessarily get that with every single case. Sometimes it's completely blank, and other times they'll have listed a friend. One wrote on there, no known family visiting the United States. And when he came to visit, he went to New York City, and he enlisted there. So he must have been an orphan from a foreign country. Okay, y'all got your thinking caps on here? Get ready, Jason. Okay, on this slide, you can see that on the left side is the paternal side. On the right side is the maternal side. And down in the bottom, we've got the brother and the sister, okay, which could be representative of a soldier and his sister. You'll notice that the sister and the brother are the sister's completely red, and the brother is partly red. And then his other half is blue. With the paternal side of the family, there is paternal, and I really dislike this word because it's very difficult for me to say, but it's patrilineal. It's the paternal side of the family's direct lineage. Let me put it that way. It's just a difficult word for me to say. And as you can see, it goes all the way back. Even though all those other white and circles and squares are still on his paternal side of the family, only that Y DNA goes up that line. So everybody, all males who descend from the grandfather, all males that descend from that great-grandfather and back, when they come down, they will all share that same Y DNA. The same with the female side. It's the direct right up that mother's line. Now, the female, of course, doesn't get Y DNA because she's female. Mothers pass down their mitochondrial DNA to every single one of their children. Doesn't matter if you're male, doesn't matter if you're female. We all get our mother's mitochondrial DNA. The difference is males do not pass it down. Even if the males have children, they will carry their mothers, their spouses of the father's DNA. So if this mother and father here, right here, if he had a brother, right, if this father had a brother, and I wish I had my little thingy there, but if the father had a brother, those first cousins would share Y DNA. But they're not going to share mitochondrial DNA because that brother's wife is not related to the soldier. It's a totally different line. So that in and of itself can be quite daunting to get people to understand, especially when I'm talking to them on the phone. Autosomal DNA is all of it. We inherit autosomal DNA from all of our ancestors. Autosomal DNA is found in the 22 pairs of chromosomes inside every nucleus of every cell in our body. And it is referred to as nuclear DNA by DPAA. However, the only nuclear DNA that they're interested in is that of the children of the soldier, if he had any, and brothers and sisters for World War II. Now, if this was Vietnam era, of course, it may be, in fact, a parent, because I'm speaking to people that are 105 years old. And and that is to be able to get to that nucleus, the beginning of all family members. Living brothers and sisters and the children are the only ones in my era that I research that are eligible to provide nuclear DNA. And that's a very basic chart. I wanted you to understand. I already see the faces. I wanted you to understand that's a very basic chart. I like to tease people and say that there's a paper shortage that day, so they squished it all in. But that's really not true. If they had put this over multiple pages, it would have been more difficult to read and understand. This setup is actually the opposite of the chart we just looked at. On this side, on the left side, is the maternal side of the family. On the right side is the paternal side of the family. And all these relationships are based on their relationship to the soldier, which is obviously the yellow dot in the middle. Like I said, it looks daunting, but we're going to break this down here. His paternal side is going to be that carries the mitochondrial DNA, is all outlined in red. The next, which is even still on the maternal side of the family, that's highlighted in gray, there's still family members that can still be primary next to kin and secondary next to kin, but because of the type of marriage and relationship, they may not be able to provide mitochondrial DNA. And if you take a look here at that first cousin female, all of her children are allowed because they carry the same mitochondrial DNA. But she's got a brother, right? And her brother, say her brother's deceased, none of his children can provide mitochondrial DNA because that DNA died with him. All of the second, the third, whether male or female, third cousin, fourth cousin, all inherit their mother's mitochondrial DNA. So even though they can be my PNOC and my SNOC, they cannot be mitochondrial DNA donors, to where anybody in red can be. In the center, like I showed, where the yellow is, and the blue boxes, those are going to be the nuclear DNA reference points. Those are going to be the spouse, the daughter if she's living, a son if he's living, and any sister. You can see the little blue plus sign and the brother blue plus sign. They're just loaded with all kinds of DNA. And the reason that they would DNA test the spouse if she was living was to be able to differentiate the DNA that these children inherited from their mother and their father, to isolate the soldier's DNA. And that's the reason that they would test the mother. The brothers would be eligible to be a nuclear DNA donor, obviously a mitochondrial DNA donor because they share a mother. He would also be eligible to be a Y DNA donor because they share a father. The sister only can be a nuclear DNA donor or a mitochondrial because she doesn't have Y DNA. So again, she can be PNOC, she can be XNOT, she can donate nuclear and mitochondrial, but not Y. So as you can see, this can get a little daunting, but I'm going to blow this up a little bit for you, and so that you can get a closer look. See, right there. See how the nephew of the brother has got the green stripes going through that? That's because he can be, again, a Y DNA donor. I'm trying to really make sure that everybody totally gets this, because they inherited the same Y DNA from his father, who was the brother of the soldier. So it can go down. It can go down from nephew to great-nephew to great-great-nephew. But you notice the niece is grayed out. And the niece is grayed out because her mother is not related to the soldier. She doesn't inherit Y DNA. So she cannot contribute DNA-wise for the soldier, but she can be a PNOC and an SNOC for the soldier. And I've done many cases to where that's exactly what happens. And so I'm hoping that this is clear. Jason, later on I'll get with you on your test score. See how it goes. I hope this is clear, and I'll leave that up there for a minute, and so that you can understand how it goes down. Because sometimes, like I was saying earlier, you have to go way out. You have to research collaterally in order to find exactly who you're looking for. The other interesting part about this is that sometimes, that was very simple, like I said, sometimes there's multiple marriages. You could have a father that was married 3 times, a mom that was married twice. So the soldier could have full siblings. He could have half siblings via his father. He could have half siblings via the mother. And the most I've ever done is the soldier had 25 full and half siblings. Between mom, dad, and together, there was 25 of them. So it can get quite confusing. Of course, when I call, this is probably one of the best parts of my job, but also probably one of the worst parts of my job all at the same time, if it can be one and the same. They have us call the family members for a couple of different reasons. One, to verify we have actually reached the right Susie Smith. You know, you can only imagine that, that nobody's unique with a name anymore. And so we have to call and verify that. We have to call and verify that they are, in fact, the daughter of, who was the brother of. Sometimes these people do not know that they're even related to the soldier, especially when I get back to, like I said, third cousins twice removed. They don't have a clue. And in that instance, I have to confirm their heritage as well as explain to them how they are related to that soldier. That, your great-grandmother was his aunt. That kind of thing, and put it in relation to how they can understand, because I am cold calling these people. That, it's been decades since the military has contacted them about their loved one. So, at least 75 years or so. So you can imagine the shock that these people, they're going, why are you calling? And needless to say, a lot of them think it's a scam. And when they do, I provide them with, of course, my name, the telephone number of the branch, the soldier's name, his case number, and if I have their permission, I will email them a copy of the memorandum for record that I received from the branch authorizing me to research on their behalf. Sometimes they just hang up on me. It's like click, it's like, well, okay, that was done. And of course, I also have to verify their birth date and their current address. People are so fluid now. It's just unbelievable how fluid people have become. And, or they purposely, put out wrong information on their address so people still want to live off the grid. And sometimes I'm lucky with that, and sometimes I'm not. But I called this one particular fella. He was still one of my favorite cases. He lived in Ohio, and I called him. He was the nephew of the soldier via the soldier's sister. So I was explaining to him why I was calling, and then I started to explain the DNA process and was telling him that he inherited the same mitochondrial DNA as the soldier. And he was real quiet, and and then he says to me, I don't recognize the area code you're calling from. And I said, well, I'm calling from Louisiana. And I, again, started talking to him, and he said, then how come, he interrupted me again, and he said, how come you got a Midwestern accent? And I said, well, I'm originally from Michigan, and I hurried and tried to finish why I was calling him. And he said, hollering, he said, hey, honey, there's a lady on the phone who says I have feminine DNA. And I could hear her talking. She might have said, that's right, or something of that. And then he says to me, he said, I tell you what. He said, I'll donate DNA if I can get a Michigan girl to say, go Buckeyes. And so I laughed and I said, go Buckeyes. I said, and then he laughed and I said, no, in all seriousness, I said, you are not obligated under any circumstances now or in the future to donate DNA to help find your uncle. I said, I was just going along with you. And he said, I was going to do it anyway. He said, because, I got all of his medals and everything. I got everything from my mom. He said, but I was just picking. He said, I don't get to talk to Michigan people much, and when I do, they don't like me. And I'm thinking, maybe it has something to do with Go Buckeyes. I mean, I am not really quite sure. But this can take hours to contact these people. I might go through 17 phone numbers for one person, because it just keeps rotating and rotating and rotating. There was one lady from the Northeast that I talked to, 94 years old, and she was the soldier's youngest sister. Very sweet lady. Talked to her for a little bit, explained everything, and she agreed. Anything I can do, I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I thought I was the only one in the world who remembered my brother. And I said, no, ma'am, you're not. And so she told me a little bit more about what she remembered of him. And because she was 8 or 9 when he went away. She was the youngest and he was the oldest. And so she said to me, she said, there's not a lot I can do. She said, I'm old. She said, I go to bed every night wondering, God, why am I still alive? She said, but now I know. She said, you need to hurry along that kit. I don't know how much longer I got. And so it's those kind of things that lets you know this, because they haven't been found, doesn't mean people aren't remembering them. This changes the dynamics of this family. They didn't grow up with cousins or nieces and nephews because she didn't, and she never married. She had never had any children, but her brother may have. So those are the kind of heartwarming stories I get. I talked to a first cousin at one point who, when I was talking to him, he started laughing. He said, I got to tell you what my cousin did to me before he went to war. I said, what's that? He goes, the week before he went, he said, we were goofing around. He said, and he shot me in the butt with a BB gun. And I said, he did? He said, yeah. He goes, I think it may be still there. He said, not unless it disintegrated. And I didn't touch that one. I wasn't going anywhere near it. And so it's always heartwarming and sometimes very sad, especially for the ones that, and there are many people who will listen and just do not want to participate. Even some siblings. It's like, he's dead and he's gone. God rest his soul, but, they're never going to find him. And there's also the mistrust of the government, that also plays a hand in it. And so, but my last story I'd like to share with you is that I had a soldier who was born in Detroit, and he had a son who he'd never met, and I was talked with the son, and of course he was, needless to say, he was nuclear DNA and he was Y DNA, and he was also the primary next to kin. And so after I confirmed all of this stuff, started doing research on the soldier's sister, looking for the mitochondrial DNA. Well, lo and behold, this sister in the mid 1960s moved to the lake I grew up on in Michigan. I knew her as an very elderly, sweet lady who had never married, but she did hand out the best candy. I mean, she was just the sweetest lady on the face of the earth, but she had no children. And that was one of the cases I was never able to find mitochondrial DNA because the soldier's parents had immigrated to the United States. And so that, can hinder what their ability to be able to do. This is a sample of the kind of chart I would submit. Needless to say, I don't for the branch color code my charts, but you can see it's the name, born, if they're dead. Of course, the bottom people aren't dead because they have to be living. The spouse's names, the relationship to the soldier. So when the branch turns around and calls these people, they can, identify how they're related to the soldier, whether they're a third cousin or a third cousin twice removed. So you can see all these people all the way straight down. We've got the 3 pink-colored boxes are all mitochondrial DNA eligible donors. Over here are the blue, and as you can see, only the nephew who's the PNOC, is also the Y DNA donor. His son, is the SNOC. And I mean, his daughter is the SNOC. She cannot provide DNA because she doesn't have Y DNA and she doesn't inherit the same mitochondrial line, but she can be the SNOC. And so this is the kind of chart I would submit along with my report. I send a report in on every single person's in that report that I have researched. Whether they make this chart or not, they're in that report. That's it. That's my whole thing. Even though it seems so short and sweet, it can take hours and days to do that. I want to share this with you all. This is the DPAA's website. You can go up there and you can see where I've got a pull down where it says are missing, and you can actually search 2 different ways. You can go to conflict, or you can go to the searchable list of the missing. Up there, if you suspect that you may have a family member who may be unaccounted for from any of the prior wars. If you click on a search prior of non-recoverable, it's going to bring you up a PDF by state. And when you get to that, you can open it up, and it'll give you all the names, the rank, the service number, the unit they were with, finding of death or date of death. And, of course, when you click on it that you're already looking underneath World War II. This website also has thousands, and I mean thousands, of case profiles to where you can go in and you can read a little bit about the soldier. Again, this is my husband's great uncle. You can read a little bit about his final mission, the units he was with, approximate location, country, and what type of plane. Like in this particular instance, they don't even know what kind of plane he was flying. They didn't have a serial number. This differs a little bit from the IDPF file, and that's why I pointed it out. It said somewhere over the South Pacific. And now here, they've got it narrowed down to Papua New Guinea. So even between the different things that you can find on a soldier, that information is going to vary. But at the very bottom of this, you'll see in blue, active pursuit. What that means. Everyone who's got a case profile on here will have this analytical category. Uncle John, up until last year, was listed as non-recoverable. They have 4 categories within the branch and how they go through and they analyze it. Of course, deferred would mean there's been no new leads. So it's just going to be deferred. Under review is just exactly what it means. They're reanalyzing that case. They may have sent it out to an historian to do further research. It may be the fact that they're looking at other aspects in the lab. So they're going back and forth. They're always going through and they're reanalyzing it. So, and then there's active pursuit, which is where, hey, we have new information. We have enough information to pursue this and to allot money to the effort. So within the last year, Uncle John has gone from being in the non-recoverable status to under review to now active pursuit. So there's always hope. Here's a soldier. These are the press releases, and I wanted to share this with you. This is one of, this is rather kind of peculiar, and I was quite surprised when I read this. This is a soldier that was found in February of this year who died and has been recovered. He died the same day as Uncle John did. He was ground force. Uncle John was air support. He's from Gulfport, Mississippi, where my husband and I now live. And so here we have a soldier, 2 that died, one where we currently live, one where my husband is originally from. But thank goodness his remains have been found, and he's been returned to his family. He's now buried in the Biloxi National Cemetery. I want to finish this up by talking about, I get a lot of questions about how do I research a veteran? How do I find my family member who served? And, you know, to make, and of course, when I speak, I have a very limited amount of time, and I don't go through and recommend to people in the audience because I don't know their skill level. I don't know their educational level. I don't want to go through and recommend 7 books that are each a couple hundred pages long that they may or may not be interested in. I refer them to the museum's research guide, hands down, every single time. I've got 6 books that I use that I have on my bookcase. But when I need a quick answer, I need to find a quick address, I open up this book that the museum created. I just absolutely love this book. It's available for free on the website. And like I want to reiterate what Jason said earlier, is that the research services are opening up again next month now that some of the COVID restrictions have lightened up somewhat. And so if you're still in need, please sure to go to the museum's website and check out the services that they'll have available. Thank you all very much. I greatly appreciate it. Here you go, Jason.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Clarice, thank you so much for that amazing talk. That was just phenomenal. Jeremy, my colleague, is going to handle Q&A. Jeremy, I guess we'll make a judgment call on how many questions we can field for Clarice. But Jeremy, I will turn it over to you, please.
Yeah, I'll bring the microphone to you. We'll start right here. Clarice, if you'll take the podium, please.
Well, Clarice, thank you very much for your presentation. Is this on? It is. I enjoy your presentation.
Thank you.
Question, if you were to find Uncle John's P40 in the ocean, would you still be able to recover DNA from that at this point in time?
That is for higher beings than me. I don't work for the lab. I don't know how the lab would do it, but underwater, I mean, that's just way above my pay grade. I mean, I'm just one of probably hundreds of people that work on these cases. But, you know, there is so much information on DPAA's website. There are videos that you can watch where they do talk about the genetics of the whole thing. DPA's also got a Facebook page where they broadcast the family member updates. And family member updates are available to anyone. You can watch them online. You can attend them in person. The only difference is that if you if you have a family member that's on the accounted for list, you can request a private one-on-one family member update where you will meet with the military officials that will give you an update on the findings of his case. But the Facebook and they're live. You can watch them. You can, like the museum, you can type in questions, and somebody can answer that. So, but I would first check their website because it's phenomenal. You know, I don't think there's a whole lot of questions that they haven't answered when it comes to DNA.
Clarice, on that point, can you explain sort of the teams that are involved? We have genealogy, we have historians, we have the DNA. And also the site
I'll
visit.
reiterate what I said at the beginning. It's archaeologists, it's the historians, it's the archivists, it is the lab techs, it is scientists from almost every field that you can imagine, down to dentists. I mean, there are just hundreds of different fields that are available and willing and do assist in identification of these soldiers. You know, DNA obviously is used, but a lot of times they can't use DNA because there's none available. Sometimes they're using and can identify the soldiers based on the clavicle bones. They have found that the clavicle bones are almost, the same as fingerprints, sometimes with being able to identify someone, and especially for the service people that died like from the Korean War or the Vietnam, because they may have chest x-rays available so that they can compare them to that. Beginning in the 1980s, I don't know if a lot of people realize this or not, but we'll probably never have another unknown soldier because of the blood cards that they start taking from our military in the 1980s. And so there's lots of ways that, they're ensuring that every American is brought home in the future.
Clarice, I'm going to cheat here and be your next questioner.
You flunked, Jason.
I expected that completely. This is a question that Rebecca and I get a lot, and you would be the person to help us out with this one, which is because of the 1973 fire at the National Archives. So many of the Army Air Force's files, 70-80% destroyed in that fire. What we often get, of course, are these fragments that that's all we can really produce for the family when they request files. What would you advise people to do when they know that my loved one's file was destroyed in that fire? Where else might they go to find some kind of evidence about their service members' World War II service? Thank you.
First of all, they, hopefully they know the service number. If they don't, there are a number of different ways that they may be able to come up with that. One is to contact the local courthouse where they may have lived, because when you're talking about historical research services, which y'all do a wonderful job on, that they, these are people that survived the war, so they come home, and a lot of people registered and took in and filed a copy of their discharge papers, whether if it's a later war, it's going to be a DD-214. If it's an older one, it's going to be the discharge papers. They may, in fact, be on file at that courthouse. The local VA may, in fact, have a file, especially if they chose to, in later life, to use VA services to help them be able to get medical services available. I know personally, I was able to get my grandfather, who served in World War I, his complete VA file from the regional office in Detroit that contained all sorts of information, including his insurance, information that that had been canceled on him. So there's, very first thing, I would start with that. I would go through family records and determine what you can find. unit histories. Definitely do unit histories, whether they're books or a number of Facebook pages that have now, a lot of people don't realize that there's Facebook pages, like for the 49th that my husband's uncle was in, they have a private Facebook group. And where they all get on there and they share that information. So you want to go for the low-hanging fruit first, and also try the National Archives, because you just never know where else those documents are going to be located.
And thank you so much, Clarice, for being here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I actually got a question this morning from someone in the UK. He's trying to find his father. Basically, when his father was overseas in England, his mom got pregnant and the father left, and so now he's trying to locate him. What would you recommend to him? He took an ancestry DNA test and he found out there's relatives in South Carolina, so he's wondering what to do now.
Boy, that's like a whole day seminar. The very first thing, if he's done Ancestry, would be to, and he's got matches, of course, would be to reach out to those matches. That's the quickest way. The kind of results he'll get will vary. Some people may answer, some people may not answer, some people may, in fact, block him. So, because, it's like, oh, not my uncle didn't do that, so you just never know where that's going to take you. But to analyze, in order to really point how he's related to those people, Ancestry gives you like first to second cousin, close family. Well, depending upon the amount of DNA you share with that person, it could cover a number of different relationships. It could be a half-sibling. It could be an aunt or uncle. It could be, a great niece or nephew, because the DNA is done in groups. They're centimorgans. And so they have this group of centimorgans, and say if I share 750 centimorgans with, say, you, Rebecca, based on our ages and everything, no, you couldn't be my grandmother and I couldn't be yours. So that's one of the, the things that we would cross off the list as far as relationships, to be able to really hone down into possible relationships. Then you want to research your match's ancestors, because that's how you're going to find yours. But, in a nutshell, in the amount of time we have, telling me needs to contact those matches first. Okay? Anybody else? Thank
Ladies
you all.
and gentlemen, Clarise Soper, thank you very
Thank you.
much. Great. Well, thank you all for turning out. Hope you all have time to get some lunch before you have to beat the storm home. Please keep tuned to our website for upcoming programs. I don't believe we have any other educational public programs like this. Of course, we have Expressions of America, and we have our Stage Door Canteen Christmas shows. But the Institute's next program will be January 10th, featuring Dr. Walt Larimore with his book At First Light, talking about his father's wartime experience, but also coming home and dealing with the PTSD and the physical trauma that he suffered during the war, and the therapy that he went through to re-enter the regular community of Americans after the war. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to Clarice. Have a great afternoon.